What's happening, everybody? Jeff Anderson here with One Fish, Two Fish. But today we're on Florida Fishing Products YouTube channel, and today we're going to talk to y'all about how to catch speckled trout. So speckled trout are, in my opinion, one of the most fun inshore saltwater fish to catch. They're pretty easy to catch. They're in the same family as redfish, so they put up a really good fight, but they tend to jump and head shake at the surface. So I don't know, it's a really exciting fish to catch. But today I want to talk to y'all just about some things to get y'all started. And even if y'all do speckled trout fish already, then hopefully there's some tips on here that can just help y'all to maximize your time out there on the water. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run y'all through kind of my favorite lures, setups, and everything. So I'm going to talk to y'all about, you know, the baits and the lures, and I'm also going to talk about just how to locate these speckled trout. Locating the speckled trout, just like any other fish out there, is, in my opinion, the most important thing. If you can locate the fish, then you could throw bloodworms at them. You could throw anything, whether it's a hard plastic, a soft plastic. You gotta be on the fish to catch them. So with speckled trout, they're pretty finicky fish in terms of they're a schooling fish as well. So you might get into a school of them. Let's say they're like 15, 16, 17 inch speckled trout, which is about the good size for eating, up to 20 inches. And you'll catch them almost every cast, and then all of a sudden the bite will just turn off. And that's just speckled trout fishing. Speckled trout, they are a kind of finicky fish. So you do want to make sure that when you do find the speckled trout and you get into them, that you don't stop your feet on the boat if you're fishing on a boat, and you don't splash around to make too much noise, because the speckled trout, if one spooks, it'll spook the whole school and the bite could turn off. And just sometimes speckled trout will just decide to stop biting. So speckled trout are a schooling fish. And the fun part about it is, you know, you can at any point in time get into it to where it's like cast for cast. So it's really important for you to stay on it. So my favorite setup for speckled trout that I use a lot of the time is just like a bass rod. It's a 7-foot, this is a favorite Phantom rod. And then I've got my Florida Fishing Products 3000 CE. Anything from, I mean, you could even catch these fish on a 1000, but I typically prefer anything from a 2000 or a 2500 CE to the 3000 Osprey is the reel that I like to use. And then I've got 10-pound Florida Fishing Products distance braid on this. So for the baits, this MirrOlure, this is the Miradine right here. This is the MR27, and this is easily one of the most effective speckled trout lures. I really like this color as well. This is the Mardi Gras color, and so MirrOlures are excellent for catching speckled trout, because when you're targeting speckled trout, you're going to be fishing in and around structure, and the structure that speckled trout most associate to is going to be oyster beds and grass, or submerged grass. So speckled trout, they are feeding primarily on finfish. They might feed on smaller crustaceans. They absolutely feed on shrimp, 100%. So if you have live shrimp and you don't want to fish with artificials, then live shrimp will definitely get the job done. But I like to fish these Miradines right here because they suspend pretty much right in the strike zone, right above the right below the surface, about 2 feet below the surface, and it's just got a slow sink rate to it. So it just stays right in the strike zone. So this is great to fish right over top of an oyster bed, right over top of some submerged grass or things like that. So those are some areas that you want to locate these speckled trout. Speckled trout really do like that moving tide, that moving current. So if you have an area that kind of like funnels bait, where you have maybe like an inlet or a small cut that goes into like a deeper creek, and you've got some oyster beds and you've got even some grass lines around that, could be exposed grass, but that submerged grass is key as well. As speckled trout, they just love grass. So, you know, those are some areas that you want to locate these speckled trout, and that's a prime place to throw this Miradine. So this right here is probably my favorite hard plastic to throw at the speckled trout. The other setup that I like to use primarily is going to just be a jig head, just a 1/4 ounce jig head, and then this is the Z-Man Minnow Z right here. So this is the Z-Man Minnow Z. This is Creole Croaker. This is probably my favorite color. This works great no matter if you're in Florida, if you're in South Carolina, or you're up here in Virginia where I'm at. So 1/4 ounce jig head is great. Anything from a 1/4 ounce to a 1/8 ounce jig head is gonna really get the job done. These speckled trout, they do like, comparatively speaking, speckled trout do like more shallow waters. You could catch them in as shallow as 1 foot, even right up on the grass bank to drop-offs, you know, really about 3 to 4 foot down to 12, 15 feet is kind of the average depth that we're catching and targeting these speckled trout in our inshore waters, in our backwaters. So if you have like a shallow grass flat, just a shallow flat in general, or a shallow oyster bed flat, then those are some areas that you definitely want to target. Fishing these jig heads is great because you can slow roll it across an oyster bed, you know, just like the hard plastics. You know, you can even jig it, you can bounce it on the bottom. So fishing a jig is deadly for speckled trout. And some other things, some other variations that I have right here is gonna be a popping cork. Popping corks work great for speckled trout. We have a lot of tutorials on our YouTube channel, One Fish, Two Fish, on how to set up and fish a popping cork. But pretty much for a popping cork, you tie your main line to this top end with the plastic beads, and then the bottom end with these brass beads, that's what's gonna go down to your hook, down to your jig head. So if you've never heard of or fished the popping cork, then you're probably living under a rock, or you're new to fishing, which is totally cool. Then make sure to look up and Google how to fish a popping cork, because this is one of the most effective ways to catch speckled trout. And it works great because you can suspend your bait, whether you're fishing a jig head, instead of getting hung up on oyster beds or having to pick off grass because you're fishing over top of that submerged grass. Then a popping cork is ideal because you know, you can just suspend your bait right there in the strike zone. Also, if you want to just fish with that live shrimp, or even just like small finger mullet, which work great, or even pinfish for speckled trout, then you just throw it right underneath of a popping cork, put about 1.5 to 3 foot of leader line down there, and put your live bait out there, cast it over top of an oyster bed, catch that big old gator trout. So these are the two sizes of popping corks that we primarily use for catching speckled trout. Some other kind of tips for speckled trout is your jig head is really, really important, like the weight of your jig head. So I use anything from a 1/8 ounce up to a 3/8 ounce when I'm fishing inshore. It's really important that you keep in mind the heavier the jig head, the faster the sink rate. So I've got a 3/8 ounce jig head next to, this is a 1/8 ounce jig head. If I'm fishing over top of those grass flats, or really shallow in that maybe 4 foot to 3 foot, just fishing over top of a shallow area where their speckled trout are gonna be, then I'm gonna use a 1/8 ounce jig head. 1/8 ounce jig head will give that same action or similar action that this mirror lure will give. So it's just kind of like a slow fall rate, and then when you twitch it, it's just gonna, you know, have that nice action to it. So a 1/8 ounce jig head is just gonna sit in that strike zone a little bit longer, and that's really, really important. When you're fishing hard plastics, also, if you haven't caught speckled trout on hard plastics, make sure that you do check out our YouTube channel, One Fish, Two Fish, because we have tons of tutorials on how to fish a mirror lure and how to fish hard plastics. Because it's really easy, but it's something that, you know, you just have to get your confidence up if you've never fished hard plastics. So with a 1/8 ounce jig head, that's gonna give you that similar action that a hard plastic does, because it's gonna have that slower fall rate. And then a 3/8 ounce jig head is gonna work when you're fishing those drop-offs. So up here in Virginia, we fish, especially in like the later fall, winter, and early spring, we're fishing deeper areas in our backwaters. So that's gonna be like 10 foot, maybe even 15 feet. And they're gonna be, the speckled trout are gonna be on those drop-offs. You guys down in Florida and Texas, you guys are pretty much fishing primarily in the shallow flats. So that's where those 1/8 ounce jig heads really come into play. And even if you have like a weedless hook, where you have an EWG hook, an extra wide gap hook, so that's almost like a Texas rig for bass anglers, or just a weedless rig. So a 1/8 ounce jig head is gonna work really well when you're fishing that shallow water. If you're in the Gulf Coast, Florida, and across the Texas, a 1/8 ounce jig head's pretty much gonna get the job done. But if you're fishing around the jetty, and those speckled trout are gonna be a little deeper on the jetty, then that 3/8 ounce jig head is definitely gonna get the job done. Speckled trout, again, they move very large distances. So it's really important to kind of stay on the fish and, you know, just wanna eliminate water. So what I typically do when I'm locating speckled trout in a new fishery is I will mark on my Google Earth, utilizing Google Earth, and mark out areas that might be, here's 3 areas that look productive up shallow. Could be, again, I'm looking at oyster beds, submerged grass. I'm looking at areas that kind of funnel bait, where you have a wide open area, or even like a grass island that's at the mouth of a creek or a deeper creek. Those are ambush points that those speckled trout are going to be, feeding on. So I might look at, so those are ambush points that speckled trout are going to be associated to. So I might target like 3 different areas that are of like shallow water, depth, and then I might even have 3 or 4 areas that have deeper water, like a jetty, or the mouth of a creek where we're fishing drop-offs and we're fishing points. So you kind of want to just hit different areas, and as speckled trout move large distances, you do want to keep in mind where you're seeing birds, where you're seeing bait. And if you pull into a creek and you see a bunch of life, you see a bunch of birds sitting on docks or even diving or things like that, those are some things that you definitely want to keep in mind. So hopefully that helps y'all to catch more speckled trout. All right, y'all, so stay tuned. Florida Fishing Products, we got a lot of tutorials on how to catch all your inshore species. Y'all check those out. If you need more, then check out our YouTube channel, One Fish, Two Fish. I'm Jeff Anderson. Hopefully y'all get up off your butt, catch yourself a big old speckled trout. All right, y'all, peace out.